The mistake that changed everything. Ethan Carter stood in the grand hall of the Zyrexian Empire, feeling completely out of place. The towering aliens around him had deep blue skin, glowing eyes, and wore elegant golden robes. The air smelled like a mix of exotic spices and something metallic. He adjusted the stiff collar of his borrowed ceremonial suit, trying to look confident. "This is just another diplomatic event," he told himself. "Smile, nod, don't cause trouble." The Zyrexians were one of the most powerful alien civilizations in the galaxy. Humanity had only recently started trade negotiations with them, and Ethan, a mid-level diplomat, was sent as part of Earth's delegation. His job was simple: be polite, and don't start an intergalactic war. The hall was filled with important figures. Zyrexian nobles stood in small groups, speaking in their melodic language. At the far end of the room sat Emperor Soltar, his golden throne shimmering under the massive crystal chandeliers. Next to him stood his daughter, Princess Tyra, dressed in a long, flowing gown decorated with silver patterns. Ethan had heard about Xyra before. She was not just a princess, she was a warrior, a respected leader in the Empire. She had fought in battles, commanded fleets, and was known for her cold, serious personality. Ethan had no intention of speaking to her. He planned to stay quiet, sip his drink, and leave without making a scene. But fate had other plans. The joke that changed everything. A Zyrexian noble approached Ethan, offering him a drink. The beverage was bright purple, with tiny bubbles rising to the surface. Not wanting to be rude, he took a sip. It was sweet, fizzy, and surprisingly strong. Just then, someone nudged his shoulder. It was Ambassador Reynolds, the leader of the human delegation. "Ethan," Reynolds whispered, "do not offend anyone tonight. We're guests in their empire." Ethan rolled his eyes. Yeah, I know how diplomacy works." But the drink had loosened his tongue. A few minutes later, he found himself standing near a group of Zyrexians. They were speaking in their own language, but one of them, a young noble, turned to him and said in heavily accented English, "You think humans are stronger than Zyrexians, yes?" Ethan grinned, trying to be friendly. "Oh, no way. I mean, look at you guys. Tall, glowing eyes, warrior race. It's clear you're tough." The noble smirked. "Then why do humans act so proud?" Ethan chuckled. "We just have good survival skills. We don't have the strength, the technology, or the size, but somehow we always manage to win. It's kinda funny." The Zyrexians did not laugh. Ethan felt the silence spread. Then, in an effort to lighten the mood, he pointed toward Princess Tyra, who stood across the room, her arms crossed, watching everything. Take Princess Tyra, for example," he joked. "She looks scary, but if she were human, she'd probably just be some grumpy military officer yelling at her soldiers to wake up early." Silence. The noble's eyes widened in horror. Nearby Zyrexians froze in place. A few even took a step back. Ethan's smile slowly faded. What did I say?" he asked. No one answered. Instead, the noble turned pale, his face filled with panic. Then, without a word, he rushed to the far end of the room, straight toward the Emperor. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Oh no!" The Emperor's demand. A moment later, the booming voice of Emperor Soltar filled the hall. "Who insulted my daughter?" Ethan's heart pounded. He turned and saw the entire room staring at him. The noble was speaking to the Emperor in fast direction, his hands moving wildly as he explained what had happened. Ethan took a slow step back. "This is bad. Really, really bad." Princess Tyra was staring at him now. Her glowing eyes burned with cold fury. Before Ethan could think of an escape, the Emperor rose from his throne, his massive figure towering over everyone. His deep voice shook the air. "You have dishonored the princess," he said. "In Zyrexian culture, an insult to one's honor must be repaired." Ethan swallowed. Okay. So, how do I apologize?" The Emperor's expression was stone cold. There is only one way. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He had a very bad feeling about this. You must marry her. Ethan choked on his own breath. I'm sorry. What? You insulted a royal, the Emperor continued. To restore balance, you must take responsibility. You will marry my daughter. Ethan's brain shut down. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. He glanced at Princess Syra, who looked just as horrified as he felt. She hated the idea just as much as he did. Wait, Ethan stammered. Let's just talk about this. There is nothing to discuss, the Emperor said. The wedding will take place in 3 days. Ethan's pulse raced. He could already feel the weight of hundreds of alien eyes on him. If he refused, it could be seen as another insult, maybe even an act of war. The guards around the room stepped forward, making it clear he had no choice. Ethan took a shaky breath. He had come to negotiate a trade deal. Now he was accidentally engaged to an alien princess, and by the look in her eyes, she wanted to kill him. The princess hates me. The Empire watches me. Ethan Carter sat in the lavish guest quarters of the Zyrexian palace, staring blankly at the intricate alien patterns on the ceiling. His mind replayed the last hour over and over. He had just been sentenced to marry an alien princess. This had to be a nightmare, a bad dream. Any second now, he'd wake up in his tiny apartment back on Earth, laugh at how ridiculous this was, and move on with his life. But the heavy, metallic scent of Zyrexian incense filling the air and the large armored guards standing outside his door told him otherwise. This can't be happening, he muttered, running a hand down his face. I insulted her. That's it. That's not worth a freaking wedding. A low, irritated growl came from the other side of the room. Ethan turned his head and met the furious golden eyes of Princess Syra. She was pacing back and forth, her hands clenched into fists, her sharp nails glinting in the dim lighting. She was not happy. Do you have any idea what you've done, human? She spat, her voice sharp as a blade. You humiliated me in front of the entire court. And now, because of your foolishness, I am bound to a ridiculous tradition that I despise. Ethan threw up his hands. Hey, don't blame me. I didn't know your people had these insane rules. Where I'm from, jokes don't end in forced marriage. Vyra whirled on him, her silver gown swaying with the movement. That is because your kind has no concept of honor. Ethan scoffed. Oh, come on. I said one dumb thing. And now I have to marry a woman who clearly wants to strangle me. That's not honor. That's madness. Zyra's eyes flashed, and for a second, Ethan thought she might actually lunge at him. But she took a deep breath, regaining her composure. Do not think for a second that I wish this marriage to happen, she said coldly. I would rather fight 1,000 battles than be tied to a human. Ethan placed a hand on his chest. Well, gee, thanks. That really makes a guy feel special. She ignored his sarcasm. The wedding is in 3 days. After that, you will be expected to take on duties as my consort. Ethan nearly choked. Consort? You mean like a prince? Syra's lips curled in disgust. No, you will hold no power. You will simply be tolerated. Ethan scowled. Well, that's fantastic. Love the warm welcome. Zyra turned away from him, clearly done with the conversation. Ethan slumped back into the chair. 3 days. He had 3 days to figure out a way out of this mess. An empire watching. The next morning, Ethan was escorted to the palace courtyard, where dozens of Zyrexian nobles gathered, whispering and watching him like he was some rare alien specimen. He heard snippets of their conversations. He is so small. How could such a creature be worthy of our princess? A human. This is an embarrassment to the Empire. Perhaps she will kill him after the wedding. Ethan gulped. Great. Even the people were rooting for his doom. At the center of the courtyard stood Emperor Soltar, his golden robes shimmering in the morning light. Beside him, Princess Gyra stood with a stiff posture, her face completely unreadable. "You will train," the Emperor said, his deep voice echoing. "You will learn our customs. You will prove that you are worthy." Ethan blinked. "Oh, what now?" The Emperor gestured, and suddenly, a Zyrexian warrior stepped forward. He was massive, at least 8 feet tall, with thick muscles and glowing red tattoos along his arms. He carried a long curved blade that looked like it could cut Ethan in half with one swing. Ethan paled. "Are you kidding me?" he muttered under his breath. "Your first lesson," Kyra said with a smirk. "Survival. The training session." Ethan barely dodged the first strike. The Zyrexian warrior moved fast, too fast for something that big. His blade sliced through the air, missing Ethan's face by mere inches. "Whoa! Whoa! Time out!" Ethan shouted, scrambling backward. "I thought this was a lesson, not an execution." The warrior growled. "There is no time out in battle." He lunged again. Ethan rolled to the side, heart hammering. "Okay," he gasped. "Maybe I should have hit the gym more." The crowd watched in amusement as Ethan dodged and scrambled, completely outmatched by the Zyrexian warrior. He had no weapons, no training, and no plan. Gyra folded her arms, unimpressed. Pathetic. Ethan glared at her. "Oh, I'm sorry. I must have left my laser sword in my other pants." The warrior swung again, and this time, Ethan did something unexpected. He ducked at the last second and grabbed a handful of sand from the ground, throwing it straight into the warrior's eyes. The warrior stumbled back, momentarily blinded. The crowd gasped. Gyra's eyes widened in shock. Ethan, panting, put his hands on his knees. "Yeah, that's right. Welcome to human survival tactics." Silence. Then, to his utter surprise, the Emperor let out a deep, rumbling laugh. "Clever," Soltar said. "Perhaps this human is not as weak as he seems." Gyra, however, was not amused. She stepped forward, grabbing Ethan by the collar of his shirt. "Listen to me, human," she hissed. "You may have impressed my father, but you are still nothing to me. If you think this marriage will make you one of us, you are mistaken." Ethan held up his hands. "Hey, trust me. The last thing I'd want is to be a part of your royal soap opera." Gyra narrowed her eyes. "Then you better start finding a way out." Ethan gulped. He was working on it. A deadly warning. That night, Ethan sat in his room, trying to come up with a plan. He couldn't run. The guards would catch him. He couldn't refuse the marriage. That would insult the Empire. Then, a sudden whisper broke the silence. "Human." Ethan tensed. He turned to see a shadowy figure standing in the corner of his room. A Zyrexian, cloaked in darkness. "You are in danger," the figure said. "There are those who do not want this marriage to happen. If you do not leave soon, you may not live to see your wedding day." Ethan's blood ran cold. First, forced marriage. Now, assassins. He was really starting to hate this place. Assassins, lies, and a dangerous escape. Ethan Carter sat frozen in his quarters, his pulse hammering in his ears. The shadowy figure in the corner of the room stood completely still, glowing alien eyes locked onto him. "You are in danger, human," the figure whispered again, voice barely audible over the quiet hum of the palace walls. "There are those who do not want this marriage to happen. If you do not leave soon, you may not live to see your wedding day." Ethan swallowed hard. "Great," he muttered. "That's exactly what I needed. Another reason to be terrified." The figure didn't react to his sarcasm. Instead, it stepped forward, revealing a hooded cloak draped over its tall, lean frame. "I am not here to harm you," the stranger said. "But there are others who will." Ethan forced himself to breathe. He had two choices. Sit here and pretend this was some prank. Take the warning seriously before he ended up dead. Considering how the past 48 hours had gone, he was leaning toward the second option. "All right," he said cautiously. "So who exactly wants me dead?" The figure hesitated. Then, in a low voice, it said, "The Zyrexian Council of Nobles." Ethan frowned. "Wait, the same guys who looked at me like I was a cockroach at breakfast?" "Yes." "Well, that's not surprising," Ethan muttered. "They don't seem like the welcome outsiders with open arms kind of people." The stranger's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "This is bigger than dislike, human. This is politics. Power. Blood. The Council sees you as a threat to the Empire's traditions. If a human marries the princess, it will shake the balance of power. They will do anything to stop it." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Fantastic. So what's their plan?" The figure didn't answer right away. Instead, it turned toward the window, glancing at the twinkling cityscape below. When it finally spoke, its words sent a cold chill down Ethan's spine. "They will assassinate you before the wedding. A sudden attack." Ethan barely had time to process the information before a loud crash echoed through the halls. The stranger whirled around, their posture suddenly tense. Ethan jumped to his feet, heart pounding. What was that? The sound of rushing footsteps filled the air. The door to his room slammed open, and before he could react, 3 masked figures rushed inside, weapons drawn. Ethan threw himself to the side just as a blade sliced through the air where his neck had been a second ago. "Yep, definitely assassins," he shouted. The hooded figure who had warned him sprang into action, drawing a sleek, curved dagger and engaging the intruders. The room erupted into chaos. Blades clashed, furniture shattered, and Ethan barely managed to avoid getting skewered. One of the assassins lunged at him. Ethan ducked and grabbed the nearest thing he could find, a heavy golden vase, and smashed it into the assassin's face. The Zyrexian stumbled back, stunned. "Ha!" Ethan shouted. "Take that, you." The assassin recovered faster than expected and threw a punch straight into Ethan's gut. Ethan doubled over. "Oh, that's bad." He hit the floor hard, gasping for air. Before the assassin could finish him off, the hooded figure slashed across their chest, sending them crashing against the wall. "Get up," the stranger barked. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. The remaining 2 assassins realized they were losing and retreated out the window, disappearing into the city below. Silence fell. Ethan wiped a trickle of blood from his lip and looked at the wreckage of his once luxurious quarters. "Well," he said, breathless, "there goes my security deposit." The hooded figure turned to him, eyes sharp. "We need to leave. Now." Ethan's stomach twisted. "Leave? As in, run? Where exactly am I supposed to go? I'm on a planet full of people who either hate me, want me dead, or want to marry me." "The palace is not safe," the stranger said firmly. "They will try again. And next time, you won't be lucky." Ethan hesitated. "And Princess Syra?" The stranger's eyes darkened. "She is a warrior. She will survive." Ethan clenched his jaw. He barely knew Syra, and she wasn't exactly his biggest fan, but leaving her behind didn't sit right with him. Still, staying here was basically asking to be stabbed in his sleep. With a heavy sigh, he nodded. "All right, let's get the hell out of here." Escape through the city. Getting out of the palace wasn't easy. The guards were everywhere, and the entire place was under high alert after the attack. Ethan and the stranger moved through the shadows, dodging patrols and slipping past security checkpoints. At one point, they had to hide behind a massive statue of Emperor Soltar, waiting for a squad of Zyrexian soldiers to pass. Ethan leaned over to the stranger. "I hate to be the guy who asks questions at a bad time, but who the hell are you?" The figure hesitated, then slowly pulled back their hood. Ethan's eyes widened. The stranger was a woman, but not just any woman. She had sharp features, piercing green eyes, and a scar running across her cheek. Her skin had the same deep blue hue as the Zyrexians, but she carried herself differently, like a rogue, an outsider. "My name is Kyrazel," she said. "I was once a warrior of the Empire, before they betrayed me." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. The same guys who want me dead." Kyrazel smirked. "Now you're catching on." Before Ethan could ask more, alarms blared across the palace. "They found the bodies," Kyrazel muttered. "We need to move." She grabbed Ethan's wrist and yanked him forward, leading him through a hidden passage beneath the palace walls. As they emerged into the neon-lit streets of the Zyrexian capital, Ethan knew one thing for sure: he was in way over his head. Meanwhile, back in the palace, Princess Zyra stormed into the throne room. Her father, Emperor Xolter, sat on his throne, surrounded by the council of nobles. "They tried to kill him," Zyra said coldly. The emperor's expression remained unreadable. "Yes." Zyra's eyes narrowed. "You knew." Xoltar exhaled slowly. "The council sees the human as a threat. They are afraid of change, and they will do what they believe is necessary." Zyra's hands clenched into fists. "He is a fool, yes, but he does not deserve death." The emperor met her gaze. "And what would you have me do?" Zyra hesitated. She didn't know the answer. She had spent her whole life believing in the traditions of her people, but now something felt wrong. For the first time, she questioned everything she had been taught. And for the first time, she felt the urge to protect the human. A dangerous alliance. The neon lights of the Zyrexian capital flickered overhead as Ethan Carter followed Kyrazel through the labyrinthine streets. The city was alive with movement. Hovering transports zipped past. Alien merchants shouted in strange tongues, and towering holograms projected advertisements for things Ethan couldn't even begin to understand. But he wasn't sightseeing. He was running for his life. Kyrazel pulled him into a dark alley, pressing him against the cold metal wall. She peered around the corner, scanning the streets. "They've locked down the palace," she muttered. "They'll be searching for you everywhere." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Great. So where exactly are we going?" She glanced at him. "Somewhere safe." "Define safe." She hesitated before answering. "A place the Empire does not control." Ethan frowned. "That doesn't sound promising." Kyrazel gave him a sharp look. "Do you want to go back and get executed?" Point taken. A city on the edge of rebellion. They moved deeper into the city, passing through shadowy tunnels and underground districts Ethan hadn't even known existed. The further they went, the more different the city felt. This was no longer the pristine, polished capital he had seen from the palace windows. Here, the walls were covered in graffiti, and the people looked rougher, angrier. Unlike the nobles who had sneered at him, these Zyrexians didn't wear fine robes or golden jewelry. They wore patchwork armor, street clothes, and carried weapons openly. "This place feels tense," Ethan murmured. Kyrazel nodded. "This is where the real Zyrexians live. Not in the Emperor's palace, but in the streets. You see those markings." She pointed at a symbol painted on a wall, a crimson eye, slashed through with jagged lines. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Some kind of gang." Kyrazel shook her head. "No, a resistance." Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, are you telling me there's a rebellion against the Emperor?" She gave him a humorless smile. What empire doesn't have one? Before he could process that, she led him down a narrow passageway and knocked twice on a rusted metal door. A small slot opened, revealing a pair of glowing yellow eyes. "Kyrazel?" a rough voice asked. Kyrazel nodded. "Let us in." The door creaked open, and Ethan followed her inside. The room was dimly lit, but it was filled with people, Zyrexians of all kinds, armed to the teeth. Ethan's gut tightened. He had just walked straight into a resistance hideout. The resistance leader. The battle for respect. Ethan Carter stood in the center of a massive underground chamber, staring at the hundreds of Zyrexians gathered around him. The air was thick with tension, the walls covered in flickering neon lights and banners with symbols he didn't recognize. This was the true heart of the resistance, hidden beneath the capital. An entire underground city of warriors, rebels, and outcasts. And now, they were all watching him. "This is insane," Ethan muttered under his breath. Kyrazel, standing beside him, gave him a sharp look. "It's the only way." Ethan exhaled slowly. Less than a week ago, he had been a simple diplomat trying to avoid trouble. Now he was standing in a secret rebel stronghold, being challenged to a fight he couldn't afford to lose, a fight for respect. Verkin, the battle-scared leader of the resistance, stepped forward. His piercing golden eyes locked onto Ethan. "The people do not trust you, human," he said, voice deep and commanding. "If you are to stand beside the princess, if you are to survive what is coming, you must prove yourself." Ethan frowned. "Prove myself? By doing what, exactly?" Varkin gestured toward the combat pit in the center of the chamber. "By surviving." Ethan's stomach twisted. "Oh, fantastic." The crowd cheered in excitement as a massive Zyrexian warrior stepped forward. The alien was easily twice Ethan's size, covered in thick armor, with long curved blades strapped to his back. His glowing tattoos pulsed with energy, and his cold smirk sent a very clear message. This would not be a fair fight. Kyrazel leaned close to Ethan. "His name is Ralzek. He is undefeated in the pit." Ethan groaned. "Of course he is." Varkin raised his hand. "The challenge is simple. Survive 3 rounds, and you will earn the respect of the resistance." Ethan blinked. "Wait, just survive." Ralzek let out a low, rumbling laugh. "Oh, human, you won't." Ethan swallowed hard. Well, this was going to suck. Round 1. The monster attacks. The moment the fight began, Ralzek charged. Ethan barely had time to react before the massive Zyrexian swung his fist like a wrecking ball. Ethan ducked at the last second, the force of the swing sending dust and debris flying. "Jesus," Ethan gasped. Ralzek grinned, his sharp teeth glinting under the neon lights. "Come, little human. Show me your strength." Ethan had no weapons, no armor, and no plan. He dodged another attack, rolling out of the way as Ralzek's blade slammed into the ground, leaving a deep scar in the metal floor. The crowd roared with excitement. Ethan wasn't winning this fight with strength. He needed to think. Fast. Round 2. Outsmarting the warrior. Ralzek charged again, but this time, Ethan sidestepped at the last moment, causing the massive warrior to slam into the wall. The crowd gasped. Ethan grinned. "Okay, maybe I can work with this." He started dodging instead of fighting, making Ralzek waste energy with every swing. The Zyrexian was powerful, but he was also slow. Ralzek growled in frustration. "Stop running, human." Ethan smirked. "Nah, I think I like living." The crowd started to change. Some were still laughing at Ethan, but others were now watching with interest. The human wasn't weak. He was smart. Round 3. The trick that changed everything. Ralzek was getting angry. His attacks were becoming reckless. Ethan noticed something. Whenever the warrior swung, he left his side open for just a second. That was his weakness. Ethan grabbed a handful of dirt from the ground and threw it at Ralzek's face. The warrior flinched, momentarily blinded. Before he could recover, Ethan darted behind him and kicked the back of his leg. Ralzek stumbled forward, losing balance. The crowd exploded in shock. Ethan backed away, breathing heavily. "All right. That's 3 rounds. We're done here, right?" Varkin raised a hand. "Enough." Ralzek glared at Ethan. Then, to everyone's shock, he smiled. "You fight like a coward," the warrior rumbled. "But you fight well." The crowd cheered. Ethan had survived. A surprising offer. Varkin stepped forward. "You have earned the right to stand among us." Ethan exhaled in relief. "Oh, thank God." But then Varkin's expression turned serious. "There is one more thing you must do." Ethan groaned. "Oh, come on. What now?" Varkin looked him straight in the eye. "You must return to the palace." Ethan's relief vanished. "What?" Hyrazel nodded. "If you disappear, the council will win. They will say you fled out of fear. The only way to beat them is to stand in front of the entire empire and show them you are not afraid." Ethan rubbed his temples. "This is the worst plan I've ever heard." Varkin smirked. "That's why it will work." Meanwhile, back at the palace, Princess Zyra stood before the council of nobles, her arms crossed as they whispered among themselves. "The human is gone." One of them sneered. "Good. He was never worthy." Zyra stiffened. A part of her had expected Ethan to run, but another part of her had expected him to fight. She didn't know why that thought unsettled her. "The wedding must be cancelled." Another noble said, "The empire cannot suffer this disgrace any longer." Zyra was about to respond when a loud commotion echoed from the palace entrance. The massive doors swung open, and Ethan Carter walked in. Gasps filled the room. He was bruised, dirty, and had the look of someone who had been through hell. But his eyes burned with determination. Zyra's breath caught. He hadn't run. He had come back. Ethan looked directly at the Emperor. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Had to prove to some people that I'm not just some weak human." The Emperor studied him carefully. Then, slowly, he smiled. Zyra's heart pounded. The nobles had underestimated the human. And now, they were about to regret it. The final confrontation. The moment Ethan Carter stepped into the Grand Zyrexian Palace, all eyes locked onto him. The Council of Nobles, a collection of powerful ancient Zyrexians who had controlled the empire from the shadows for centuries, stared in stunned silence. They had expected him to run, to disappear, to die. Instead, he had returned, bruised, battered, and walking straight through the throne room like he belonged there. Princess Zyra stood near the Emperor, her golden eyes narrowing as she studied him. "You survived," she said, her voice unreadable. Ethan smirked, disappointed. Before she could answer, a booming voice echoed through the chamber. "Enough." Emperor Xolter stood from his throne, his piercing gaze sweeping over the nobles. "The human has returned," he said, "and he has proven himself to the people." A ripple of uneasy murmurs spread through the nobles. This was not part of their plan. One of the eldest nobles, Lord Varizel, stepped forward, his face twisted with disdain. "This is an insult to our traditions. You cannot allow a weak, insignificant outsider to claim a place among us." Ethan snorted. "Buddy, I just fought an 8-foot-tall murder machine with glowing tattoos. I think I've earned a seat at the table." The nobles hissed in anger. Zyrexians were not used to humans speaking to them this way. Ethan didn't care. Zyra, watching this, felt something unexpected. Amusement. The human had no fear. And that, she realized, terrified the nobles. A power play. Lord Varizel turned back to the Emperor, his face twisted with frustration. "This farce must end. The human has no right to marry the princess. He is unworthy, and the Empire will not accept him." Xolter raised an eyebrow. "Then perhaps we should let the people decide." A murmur ran through the chamber. "The people?" Varizel sneered. "What does it matter what the commoners think?" Ethan smirked. "Oh, see, that right there. That's the problem." The noble snarled at him, but Ethan didn't back down. "I've seen the real Zyrexian people. Not the ones sitting on golden thrones, but the ones in the streets. The warriors, the workers, the ones struggling under your rule. You think they don't talk? That they don't notice the corruption, the backroom deals, the way you cling to power like your lives depend on it?" Varzel's expression darkened. "You speak like a rebel." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe I just think your system sucks." The noble turned to Xolter. "This human is dangerous." Xolter smiled slightly. "Perhaps that is why he intrigues me." The duel of honor. Varizel clenched his fists. "This is unacceptable. If he truly wishes to claim a place among us, then let him prove it the Zyrexian way. Ethan blinked. Oh no, I don't like where this is going. Varzul smirked. Let him face a trial of honor. A duel against one of our greatest warriors. If he wins, he stays. If he loses, he dies. Ethan sighed heavily. Why is it always a fight to the death? Soltar considered the challenge, then turned to Ethan. Do you accept? Ethan turned to Exira, hoping for some kind of help. She stared at him, unreadable, then simply said, If you wish to stand beside me, you must stand as my equal. Zyrexians do not run from battle. Ethan groaned. Of course they don't. He looked back at the Emperor. All right, fine. But if I die, I'm going to be really, really annoyed. The Emperor smiled. Then prepare yourself, human. The battle begins. The arena was set within the palace, a massive circular chamber with an open ceiling that revealed the neon-lit sky. The walls were lined with hundreds of spectators, nobles and warriors alike, eager to see how the weak human would fare. Ethan stood in the center, rolling his shoulders. This was insane. Across from him stood his opponent, Commander Zorgzan, the Emperor's personal champion. He was at least 9 feet tall, with obsidian black armor and a massive energy blade crackling with red plasma. Ethan's heart sank. Yeah, okay, I'm dead. The first strike. The duel began, and Zorgzan moved like lightning. Before Ethan could react, the giant warrior was already on him, swinging his massive blade with terrifying speed. Ethan barely dodged, the heat from the plasma burning the air inches from his face. The crowd roared. Ethan stumbled back. He was fast, too fast. His mind raced. Think, think, think. He couldn't match Zorgzan in power, but he could outthink him. A clever trick. Ethan waited for the next attack. The moment Zorgzan swung again, Ethan ducked low and rolled between the warrior's legs. The crowd gasped. Before Zorgzan could turn, Ethan grabbed a handful of sand from the arena floor and threw it directly into the champion's face. Zorgzan staggered back, momentarily blinded. The crowd erupted in shock. Even Xyra's eyes widened. Ethan grinned. Not bad for a weak human, huh? The final blow. Zorgzan recovered quickly, furious now. He charged at Ethan, swinging his plasma blade in a deadly arc. Ethan dropped to his knees, letting the swing pass over his head. Then, using all his strength, he drove his fist into the side of the warrior's knee. Zorgzan stumbled. Ethan didn't give him a chance to recover. He lunged forward, grabbing a fallen energy blade from the ground, and pressed it to Zorgzan's throat. Silence. Then the Emperor stood. The battle is over. Ethan let out a shaky breath. He had won. The aftermath. As Ethan stood, exhausted and covered in sweat, the nobles watched in stunned silence. One by one, they lowered their heads, a sign of respect. Even Xyra, standing in the royal box, gave him the slightest nod. Varzul's face was twisted with rage, but he knew he had lost. Ethan had earned his place. Soltar stepped forward. It seems the human has proven himself. The Emperor smiled. And now, there is only one thing left to do. Xyra stiffened. Ethan blinked. Wait, what do you mean? Soltar's golden eyes gleamed. The wedding must go on. The unexpected ending. The air inside the Zyrexian palace felt electric with tension. The arena duel had ended, but the echoes of Ethan's unexpected victory still rippled through the gathered nobles, warriors, and commoners alike. Ethan Carter, the human nobody respected, had just done the impossible. He had defeated Commander Zorgzan, the Emperor's personal champion. And now, standing before Emperor Soltar, his breath still heavy from the battle, Ethan realized something horrible. The duel was only step one. The Emperor's golden eyes gleamed as he looked down at Ethan, then turned toward his daughter, Princess Xyra. "It is settled," Soltar announced. His deep, booming voice filled the chamber. "The human has proven his strength, his resolve, and his place within our empire." Ethan gulped. The Emperor's next words hit him like a meteor. "Tomorrow, the wedding shall proceed." Ethan's stomach dropped. The wedding that no one wanted. Ethan was locked in his guest quarters, given no choice but to prepare for the ceremony. Outside his doors, Zyrexian guards stood like statues, making it clear that this was not up for debate. His mind raced. He had fought his way through assassins, rebels, and warriors. He had earned the respect of the people. But now he was supposed to marry a woman who wanted nothing to do with him. Ethan groaned, flopping back onto the large, silk-covered bed. "This is insane," he muttered. "This whole planet is insane." The door creaked open. Ethan sat up fast, ready for another assassin attack. But instead, standing in the doorway, arms crossed, was Princess Syra. She stared at him with that same unreadable expression. But this time, there was something different in her gaze. "We need to talk," she said. Ethan sighed. "Yeah, no kidding." An unlikely agreement. Syra stepped into the room and shut the door behind her. The glow from the neon city outside cast strange shadows across her face, making her look even more unreadable. "Listen," she said, voice firm. "I do not want this marriage." Ethan raised his hands. "Great. We're on the same page. Let's tell your dad and—" "No," she cut him off. "It is not that simple." Ethan frowned. "Because of honor, tradition, and all that." Zara's golden eyes flashed. "Because if we refuse this marriage, we both die." Ethan's heart stopped. "I'm sorry. What hate?" Zara paced the room, frustrated. "The nobles are furious that you have survived this long. The council sees you as a threat. If the wedding does not happen, they will demand your public execution to restore order." Ethan felt lightheaded. "Man, you guys really don't do anything halfway, do you?" Zara shot him an unimpressed look. Ethan rubbed his temples. "Okay, so what do we do?" For the first time, Zara hesitated. She hated what she was about to say. "We go through with it," she said finally. Ethan blinked. "Excuse me?" Zara sighed, clearly hating this just as much as he did. "We marry. Publicly. We let the people see it. And then, we find a way out." Ethan stared at her. "You're talking about staging a fake marriage just to stay alive." Zara gritted her teeth. "If it keeps us from being executed, then yes." Ethan sighed, rubbing his face. "This is the weirdest day of my life. The wedding of the century." The next day, the entire capital gathered in the Grand Royal Hall. The walls were covered in glowing banners. Traditional Zyrexian wedding symbols projected across the air. The Empire's most powerful nobles stood in silence, watching Ethan and Syra as they walked toward the ceremonial altar. Ethan had expected resistance, anger, maybe even an attack. But instead, he saw something else: curiosity. The commoners, the warriors, even some nobles, they were watching him not with hatred, but with fascination. He wasn't supposed to make it this far. He wasn't supposed to survive. But he had. And now, they wanted to see what happened next. Zyra stood beside him, rigid as a statue, dressed in the traditional silver wedding armor of her people. Her face was unreadable, but he could tell she was thinking the same thing he was. How the hell did we end up here? Emperor Soltar stood before them, holding the binding blade, the ceremonial dagger that would seal a union. In the name of honor and tradition, the emperor said, "We unite two warriors, bound by fate and the will of the stars." He extended the blade. Zara took it first, pressing the edge against her palm. A thin line of golden Zyrexian blood appeared, glowing under the light. She then passed the blade to Ethan. Ethan swallowed hard. This was it. He took the blade, pressing it against his own palm. A drop of red human blood mixed with hers. The emperor nodded. "It is done." The hall exploded in cheers. The people had accepted it. But Ethan knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. After the wedding. Later that night, Ethan and Xyra sat in a hidden chamber, away from the public. "We did it," Ethan said. "We survived." Xyra nodded, but she looked tense. "The nobles will not stop," she said. "Now that you are one of us, they will look for new ways to remove you." Ethan exhaled. "Yeah, I figured. Guess I'm stuck here, huh?" Xyra hesitated. Then, finally, she said something that surprised them both. "Perhaps that would not be so bad." Ethan turned to look at her. "Wait, are you saying?" She didn't answer. But she didn't have to. The war wasn't over. The Empire was still on the edge of change. And now, for better or worse, Ethan was part of it.